Okay, let's go for it. Okay, so good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar this morning that is focused on the future of care leadership. So delighted you've been able to take some time out of your very busy schedules to join us this morning. The intention of this is to be very much a knowledge sharing webinar where we aim to bring to life and have some constructive conversation around care leadership, share some of the tactics, some of the frameworks, and share a bit of our own knowledge around everything that relates to care leadership across the sector. So before we get started, I'll just set the scene a little bit, and I'll do a little bit of housekeeping. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Phil Hitchcox. I'm the Strategic Development Director here at Flourish. I'm joined by some colleagues, some team members who will be on our panel, joining us from different organisations that bring lots of different experience and lots of different perspectives on leadership in care. I'll hand over to the team to introduce themselves shortly. So this is intended to be a really informal session. We wanted to kind of bring something to everyone that was really kind of focused on leadership, celebrating the importance of leadership, and sharing some ideas, sharing some tactics, as I said. So hopefully you'll all be able to take away a little something from today that you may be able to apply or use in your own kind of environments. So the session is likely to be there and thereabouts 45 to kind of 50 minutes. We want to keep it within the hour, so hopefully we can give you some time back. We will cover some kind of content, and then we're going to have three kind of panel discussions, really informal. There'll be conversations around 2 or 3 different subject areas that we think hopefully will be relevant to you. And at the end of the session, we will also then enable you to kind of ask some questions, and we can do a Q&A session for the last kind of 5-10 minutes towards the end. So if you have any questions, anything that kind of springs to mind, anything you want to share, anything you want to flag, by all means, feel free to put that into the chat. Some cases we may be able to pick it up as we go through the conversation sessions, and if we can't, we'll certainly pick that up at the end of the session, and we can have 5 or 10 minutes focusing on that. We'll be sharing the slides as well and the recording of this for all of you who are attending today as well. So if you want a copy of this, obviously we'll send this as a follow-on from today as well. So before we kind of make a start, very grateful that Richard, Tay and Matt have been able to join our panel. I'm excited in terms of the conversations we're going to have this morning, and I know a lot of experience collectively between 3 of the team. So I wonder if I may hand over to you guys just to kind of give a very brief introduction, who you are, what you do, and your background would be really helpful. I'll start with you, Richard, given your top left, if you're okay to introduce yourself.
Sure, thanks, Phil. Yeah. Good morning, everybody. My name's Richard Mills. I am an independent social care trainer and assessor. My background is in working with people with autism and learning disabilities. I've worked for the National Autistic Society, the Wessex Autistic Society, and various roles with another organisation based in Surrey. And over the last 6 years, I have been facilitating skills for care based leadership programs pretty much every week, and probably several times a week as well. So I have a wealth of experience in facilitating those kind of conversations with leaders in social care.
Wonderful. Thank you, Richard. Appreciate that. It's great context. Tay, are you okay to introduce yourself?
Hello, morning all. I'm Tay. In terms of a background, so I've been working in social care basically from the moment that I'm born. I'm 2nd generation running care homes. I actually started off working in research, so I used to work at the Social Care Workforce Research Unit as part of King's College London. I've been registered manager of a care home, CEO of an LD group, and I'm managing director of care homes for over and under 65. We set up an organisation called Care Providers Voice in 2020, myself and colleague Mike Armstrong, and we support social care providers across North East London. We've got over 900 members, and that's for care homes, home care, supported living, day opportunities, and we work with the voluntary and community sector as well. And we have a team behind us that includes borough leads, who are all leaders, but also have day jobs, and all our providers, as well as our fantastic team, our CPV team as well.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tay. Very busy as well, by the sounds of it, with all of that within your remit. That's brilliant. Thank you, Tay. Really appreciate that. And last but not least, Matt, if you're okay, just introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. Good morning, everyone. I'm Matt Aldridge Russell. I'm Head of Learning and Development for the Orders of St John Care Trust. The trust itself has 70 services across the country, mix of private and local authority contracts. Personally, I've worked within health and social care for 4 years, within leading the learning and development team at OSJCT. Prior to that, for kind of 20 years, still in learning and development, but on the corporate side within kind of retail, financial services and customer services. So yeah, that's probably about all I'll share for now.
Wonderful. That's great, Matt. Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate that. And thanks once again for joining us this morning. Really appreciate it. So let's get started. So I guess today, just to set a bit more of the scene, we want to cover various different kind of themes, various different topics that surround leadership and management. This isn't just focused on leadership and management, just leadership, sorry. We are looking at management and how we can develop our future and existing workforces to be effective managers and leaders. I think we all know how important it is and how important effective leadership and management has on an organisation, their effectiveness, their vision, their drive, their performance. But also we want to dip into a little bit today around kind of organisational culture and how important values are within effective leadership. So why is effective leadership and management so important? I think we all live and breathe that we know that good leadership and management has a positive impact on all aspects of delivering safe, effective, caring and responsive services. That's a given by CQC. I think what we want to do is kind of explore, what does that mean? What does kind of effective leadership and management mean? Because you've got so many different facets and threads of effective leadership and management. You've obviously got the skills, the competence and the capability to be a manager, to be a leader, but actually it's a lot deeper and richer than that. It is about behaviours, it's about personality, it's about tenacity, it's about to drive an organisation forward, it's about setting positive examples, it's about creating a vision. There are so many different facets to it. And to a certain extent, there's no right and wrong. There are so many different threads. So we want to explore that a little bit today in terms of what does that look like, and actually we can share some examples through some of the panel members around how they've applied different leadership models, different training programs and different principles within their own kind of workforces. I think it's important in any organisation, certainly within care, that there's a clear purpose, there's clear sets of direction, there's a clear vision. I think challenging times that the industry is going through at the moment, whether you may be a small independent care organisation where you're having to deliver and having to operate across lots of different functions, having to dip up and down in terms of operational day-to-day through to kind of the more strategic things. So I think we'll touch on how important kind of leadership and management is from kind of a business perspective, a commercial perspective, as much as it is around kind of people development, communication, but dealing with change and being agile to a lot of kind of pressures that I think we're all facing within the social care sector. So we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go through. I think we know, as I mentioned, 85% of care providers in the UK have got less than 50 staff. So the role of that manager, registered manager or leader or owner becomes quite multifaceted in what they've got to do. And actually, how do we ensure that our colleagues around us are getting the support that they need? How are we setting the right goals? And how are we getting the best from the workforces that we've got today, but also for future? Because we know there are challenges in terms of attracting, recruiting and retaining, but how through effective leadership and good management can we make that more effective and smarter? Our turnover rates among CQC regulated managers, it's around about 20%. There are around about 2,800 vacancies within the sector for registered managers. And I think, it's how can we look at our talent pools, our existing talent pools, but actually our future talent pools. We know that typically 31% of registered managers are 55 and above. But how can we look at the next generation of effective leadership and managers within our own workforces? But how do we look forward as well? So they're the kind of main facts. If we can just go on to the next slide before we go into the first discussion. So the factors impacting the will to lead. So I guess these are some of the main themes that we see within a kind of leadership framework and the impacts of them. So organizational culture, and we will talk about this quite a bit today. So how important a culture is to driving forward an organization and a workforce, and how do you embed a real true culture within an organization? We'll touch on that today. I think we all know, and I guess from Flourish's perspective, learning and development is key, and we do see a real impact in terms of organizational change, performance, retention around having good, solid learning and development in place, whether that's formal, whether that's informal, whether that's coaching, mentoring, that type of thing. And certainly that plays in and out of team dynamics. We know in most cases that people choose to work in an environment where they can work well with their team and they respect their team, they respect their leaders. So how the dynamics of a team are made up within an organization is absolutely key. So it's collaborative and people are working together. And there's so many different ways that can be achieved. Clear paths for career progression, and it's not always about having a very set structured pathway of development, but it's enabling people to develop, grow, move into certain roles that they want to go into, and being quite visual and quite open and transparent around those career pathways. And I think ultimately that all drives into their retention. People are happier, they're competent, they're capable, they're motivated, they stay longer. That's a very kind of simple framework. I think it's self-explanatory, if you like. But I think what we want to go into to discuss next is how do we see that kind of working in practice? What are some of the pitfalls? What are some of the examples where we've seen that work really, really well? And any models I think we'll touch on where, from an organisation perspective, there are certain frameworks or there's certain training models that's had a positive impact. And I think that's the important bit. So we'll go into our first conversation session involving the team. So this is kind of sharing some real life examples of effective care management and leadership that you guys have deployed and implemented within your organizations and where you've seen a really positive impact. So I don't know if I can open that up to the team if someone wants to kind of take a lead in terms of some of those examples that you can share with everyone today.
Yeah, I think Phil, thank you for that, and it's really pertinent from my perspective, that the topic of organizational culture has already come up twice, and something that I see in my everyday training work is the impact of culture, and good and bad. We have examples of organizations or services that have let their cultures slip, and it becomes a negative, or it can have a blame focus, and even worse, of course, we have examples of abusive cultures. To me, if we get the culture right, so many things just flow naturally from there. So I think anything that we can do to invest effectively in culture is supporting our services, our organizations, and the future of care leadership.
And Richard, may I just kind of ask a question on terms of that? So from your experience, how do you, a culture is a culture and it's largely by the people, the personalities, what's instilled into an organization, but how, as a leader or a manager, do you kind of, have you seen, how do you instill that culture? How do you create that culture, or how do you create that almost period of change to go from one way of working, as you say, it might have been quite complex, quite a difficult culture, and actually you want to make this a very kind of open, very effective, smart culture. How have you seen that work well?
I don't think there's any kind of one way of doing that. There's probably different ways of doing that. There's moving from a closed culture to more transparency, more duty of candor, as we would say. But the really successful transformations in culture, I think, are the ones where people are more inclusive, leaders are more inclusive of their staff. They involve their staff in the development of, the vision, the values. There's a co-production kind of focus and attitude. where they come to a common agreement about what the culture, the desired culture, is what they want, and those values become real. They become lived and breathed. They become a truly what can I say, vibrant center and focus of any organization.
Right, that's really helpful. And do you think, and I think there's always that kind of discussion around, from a culture perspective, is the culture driven from the top? Is it driven from the workforce around, or is it driven by everyone who's in that organization? But you can argue that, does it need to come from the top, and it sets that example, and it sets that way of working across an organization?
I think ideally, in an ideal situation, yes, it comes from the top and it filters down through an organization, through the example of the senior leaders and through to, all levels of leadership. It doesn't always happen that way. I've seen it happen from kind of like a revolution from within, in a sense, if you see what I mean. I mean, you can imagine in my role, I sometimes I'm talking to a lot of what we call first level line managers. And if you turn the kind of hierarchy of leadership on its head, you realize, of course, there's more first level line managers than any other. So they're the majority in a sense. And so there's a lot of, I say to, first level line managers, team leaders quite often, there's a lot of power in you as a group, as a cohort, to influence culture. So yeah, ideally in a really healthy organization, it's top down, it filters down, the senior managers, directors, they make the strategy. But I don't think it necessarily has to be that way. If a strong group of first level line managers, registered managers come together, and I think they can influence culture from within as well.
Makes perfect sense. That's great. Thank you, Richard. Tay or Matt, have you got any examples kind of from your experience to bring to life?
So actually, I was just going to pick up on the point around co-producing and values and things. I think it's really important to just remember you can't be a manager, you can't be a leader by yourself, and that you need to empower your team. You need to bring your team along with you, and values that are actually set from your team means that they will have higher buy-in to the concept. They will be more likely to and just actually following on from Adele's put a comment in the chat, to say that you need to embed it into everything that you do. But it is important that it's you do realise that your team, your collective values and everything around how you work, you are only as strong as your essentially weakest link. But being the weakest link, that isn't a negative, and that's around actually understand that everybody is different. So my weakness might be your strength, for example, and how do you complement one another? How do you bring out the best in people, and what can you do then to support through training, but also understanding that if you have an organization that sort of sits in isolation, the difficulty then is that the organization culture can become quite toxic, and then you can end up just focusing on the negative. So we very much encourage people to be buddying with other organizations, to have a network, to learn from other industries as well around leadership, and where best practice comes from doesn't have to be from within just your organization. It can be from a huge range of other organizations, and encouraging that culture about being curious around the world that you see. Is there something that you've seen in the news, for example, that sparked an interest? Is there something on social media? Is something that you heard at the school gates that's of interest? And being curious to then develop best practice.
That's great, Tay. And I think that's really valuable and makes perfect sense. Just something that was coming to my mind as you were talking there around kind of the culture and values, which I absolutely agree with. Have you had experience of kind of how do you measure it? Because it's in many cases an intangible thing, isn't it? It's people, it's personality, it's their behaviors, it's their conduct. There's so many different, depths and breadths to it. Have you ever established a way of kind of, I guess, temperature checking that kind of culture, or that kind of, I don't know, satisfaction levels within your workforces?
So I'll use one of my care homes as an example. So our values are to be caring, communicative and collaborative. And these values have come from the team. We had a bit of a sit down a few years ago and discussed actually what the challenges that we face. If I use communication as an example, this is a really practical, granular example. Good communication, what does that look like? So great care plans, okay, fine. Making them person-centered, I statements, etc. All right, fine. What is bad communication? Bad communication is gossip. Bad communication is people sharing information that they don't need to know in inappropriate places with inappropriate people, and then ultimately not being resident focused, person focused. And we've got to remember, in the care sector, it's not just the values and how your team work. We are a people business, so it's around who your residents are, who your clients are, that demographic, and we're all people with different personalities. And how do you ensure that that culture not just meets the needs of your workforce, but also the care services and the people who you are supporting? So ensuring that like I said, the values, they do come from your team, and actually what they see is to be both the positive and the challenges, then that can be addressed. So we then discuss it in team meetings, so monthly team meetings and supervisions, and actually on a one-to-one basis, having quite then an open discussion, because sometimes people don't want to talk in a group setting, but giving it on a one-to-one basis individuals that opportunity to say, well, what are their challenges? What do they feel needs to be addressed, both with themselves, their own professional and personal development, but then collectively as a team, what are their solutions? So again, it goes back to empowering your team.
I think that's great. And it's that inclusivity, isn't it? It's involving team members, which ultimately is empowerment. I think, yeah, really well articulated. I think I totally agree. That's really helpful, Tay. Thank you very much. Matt, from your perspective, do you have any kind of experiences or models within your organisation or examples that you've experienced?
Yeah, there's a couple of things I will pick up on. I think one of your questions actually to Richard earlier was around, almost the how. How do you kind of take a step forward to potentially, change the organisational culture, and where does that come from? And I think something that traditionally we see, and not all organisations can do this, but it's registered managers moving from service to service and having that opportunity to start again and start afresh with a new team without maybe some of that baggage that might either go with you, or that culture that might be within the service. And it's not to say that the service that someone's coming from might be poor. It's just an opportunity to reinvent yourself and work differently with a clean slate, for want of a better word. But equally, and something we've worked with Richard quite closely on, just from a simple, what the first line managers do. We've spoken about this, in the moment kind of conversations, and this is a short recorded conversation that typically used to be used within OSJCT negatively, about pulling people up, and it's almost that first kind of warning. But it's there for positive reinforcement and reinforcing kind of, I suppose, the positive psychology. So just, we want our leaders to be spotting, great performance, and when things have been done brilliantly, to recognise that, to celebrate it. So even that, it will be, but it's always difficult sometimes for first line managers to go back into a service after being on a leadership program to start making significant differences. But by sharing these little tools or techniques, I think it becomes really quite powerful. And I think Richard and the team of delivering Lead to Succeed for us, I've kind of really seen that, and it's a real kind of light bulb moment. It's like, oh yeah, we really can, make a positive difference and reinforce those brilliant behaviours that we see.
That's great, Matt. And I think, through what you've described, and that's really helpful to hear that. Do you see a change? Because I know obviously you're delivering the programs, and you have a leadership model that you've put in place. What have you seen has been the main impacts? It sounds like you kind of people feel invested in, and people kind of, as you say, been recognised, and the celebration of, well done, you've done a great job, this is good. How have you kind of felt that has made a difference to your managers that have come through programs?
The most obvious metric really is around retention, kind of returning back to that previous slide. And if we're looking at 2023 versus 2024 retention figures for our care leaders and upwards within our services, through running or inviting actually every care leader, head of care to attend Lead to Succeed over that period. Many did attend. We've had over 200 people completing that program within the last kind of 18 months. So retention for that population improved by 40%, which is pretty significant. So that's the clearest measure around it, really, that colleagues are staying with us. And we know really that most of the time, and our other insights actually from new starter surveys. We work with a company called Great with Talent, so we do a new starter survey and exit surveys, are showing us that people are leaving managers, they're not leaving the organisation necessarily. And the metrics, I don't have the detail to share with you today, but they're positive also, that we're seeing improved induction experiences, improved line manager relationships, improved relationships within the services themselves, peer-to-peer relationships. So there are kind of, I guess we're an organisation that's large enough and lucky enough to be able to have those tools in place, and a sufficient number of colleagues completing those surveys, those questionnaires, to be able to produce a credible data set. It's significant numbers. 30 to 40% of those people that are joining us and leaving us are completing those surveys. So I think they're kind of some of the metrics, but there's always the tangible stuff or less tangible stuff around the feeling that you get when you walk into a service, the welcome that you get from colleagues, and whether you're a contractor, a resident, a prospective resident, residents, family and friends, there's a feeling that is not quantifiable by numbers. So I think that's probably...
And I think, as you say, that feeling is so important, isn't it? You want to feel valued when you're at work. You want to feel part of a team. You want to feel kind of recognised. And I think your point around people leave because of management, not necessarily because of the work or the workplace. And actually, that's, to me, really resonates in terms of the important role that managers and leaders have within an organisation. So that's really helpful. And it's great to hear and see that you have some great stats in terms of actual impact back to the organisation, obviously the workforce. Excellent. Thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate that. I think that was helpful. Of course,
could I just jump in, Phil? Because there's a couple of comments in the chat that I just wanted to pick up on, and it's also tying into, I guess, what Matt and Richard were saying around investing in your people. I think we also need to be very aware of the sector, and it's around, how do you find time? How do you find capacity? How do you find brain space to be able to invest? How do you logistically ensure that people have the time to go and do training, have the time to have those one-to-ones? And I think it's also just about ensuring that when you look at organisation culture, you do carve out that time, and that you do allow the managers, you do allow the team leaders, you do allow the workforce to be able to have meaningful interactions as well. So, for example, if you're doing a supervision, actually set aside an hour time. We all know that we're meant to do these things, but set aside an hour time where it's actually a quiet space. You're not going to be interrupted by residents or the team walking into that meeting. So that people then do feel that they are being invested in, but also it gives that individual who is receiving that input the opportunity for them to be able to think, well, what is it I want to do? Because it has to come from within, any kind of leadership or management. And when you're empowering people, and it's that relationship building, isn't it? It's a two-way street. And that also is, there was a comment about managers, enabling managers and ensuring that they also have somewhere to go. So with management and leadership, I mean, it's the cliche of the higher up you go, the more lonely it becomes. And again, it goes back to having buddies, having tying into like Skills for Care, for example, they have their registered managers networks. You will have local associations that are across the country, tying into those conversations, so that you do have the time to invest in yourself. And then to use your strengths to support others.
I think it's a really good point, and I think, like you say, it's everyone is very time bound more than ever, and I think it's what formal things from what you've mentioned, Tay, that need to be prioritised or built into a typical schedule. And I think there's also those that are probably informal and softer, which is just conversational, or taking the time out to recognise, or taking the time out to say you've done a great job, or we need to focus on. So I think it's the soft, and then it's the time stuff, isn't it? And spending that time that's needed, because you're then getting more out of your kind of workforce and your colleagues and your managers. I think that's really valid. I don't know,
we all
Matt or
tend to
Richard.
be,
Oh, go on, sorry,
sorry, I
Tay.
should say, we all tend to, you know, COVID happened. Now we've got national insurance increase happening. People are just going back to surviving and being very short term in thinking. And when you look at investment and training courses, that's mid to long term. So we just need to ensure that as a sector, we do see a future. People will always need to receive care and support services. There will always be some sort of long term for our sector. How do we ensure that we are supporting leaders and managers to see the mid to long term, and not just that day to day of how do I, you know, do the rota? How do I cover what is a very real problem today?
Yeah, totally agree. And it's all of those really essential kind of organizational things that need to happen alongside taking everyone forward, which, you know, I guess reinforces that need for effective leadership and management. But I guess the challenge is the time and capacity and bandwidth at challenging times. Great, it's really valuable, Tay. Thank you so much. So we'll move on, and we've got a couple more kind of sessions which will thread in and out of this particular subject anyway. We've touched on culture quite a bit, and we know workplace culture is more important than it's ever been, and ensuring that we've got the right core values. And I think what we've said is values is really an important thing. It's not just something you're putting on your website. It's not just something that goes on a poster in the service. It's actually something that you embed into the organizations, and it goes right down to the one-to-ones. It goes right down to how you lead and direct and performance manage, and how you know, instill those values. So I think it's really that embedding that's important, and it's not just a set of values that are never necessarily used or applied. So we'll lead following this onto a bit more of a conversation around kind of core leadership. But essentially, this is the Skills for Care Leadership Qualities Framework, which kind of focuses a lot on core skills, quite rightly, in terms of having that blend and mix of skills that are required to be an effective manager or leader. And I think, you know, some of this is naturally happens. I think certainly from my view, you see that these relationship building and networks can naturally happen. It doesn't necessarily have to be a framework or a structure or something that's rigidly built in. You will find in a lot of settings that this just naturally happens through good communication and good team working and good collaboration. And actually, sometimes the core skills are very much alongside core behaviours. And actually, those behaviours you can't always map out, you can't always train them. They are in many cases instilled. It's how you empower and how you develop behaviours and those types of things. So I think if we kind of use this as a backdrop, just going into the next slide, if that's okay. And I guess what the question we've got for the team that we can discuss now is, what other management and leadership skills do we feel will drive the sector forward? So we can see that there's a skills framework there, which is great, and that becomes the fundamentals or the foundation. But actually, above and beyond that, what do we see in your organisations within the team that you've applied or you work to, or you've seen a real difference, if that makes sense? I'll open that up to the team.
Well, I present and I deliver sessions around the leadership qualities framework and the training that I facilitate. And there's a couple of observations I'd like to make, and it's a very important framework, and I absolutely honour that. I think it's interesting that it's called a qualities framework, and then we list skills, because of the difference. You know, qualities are something that are innate in people. They're very natural things, and then skills to me are things that we can evolve and develop. And I think that's good to appreciate. Sometimes when I am in front of a group of people and we present a framework like this, there's like a divide in the group where there's people who kind of love it, and they really thrive on that kind of framework and structure. And then there's what I think of as more instinctive kind of leaders. And sometimes they go a bit kind of quiet and withdraw, and I think, what is this about? It's and I think this is really good for us to appreciate. There's not everybody has that kind of structured framework idea of what leadership is. They do it more kind of naturally, they have these qualities that are just, they're innate. And when we put up a kind of framework in front of them, they go, ah, what is this? And the reason I'm saying this is I think we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater kind of thing. Yes, the framework is very, very important. It gives people lots of important structure and information. But I see a lot of really amazing instinctive leaders as well, have natural leadership qualities. And I think nurturing and enriching that is vital.
I think that's a really good point. And I think they are behaviors, aren't they? That is a personality, it's that ability, and I've seen in the chat a mention to compassion, compassionate leadership, compassionate management, and that's that's an instinctive behavior, isn't it? But so important. I can see some really useful kind of themes on the chat coming through. Thanks, Richard. I think that's a really, really valid point. Matt or Tay?
Yeah, I think I suppose my take on certainly the leadership qualities framework is that it is potentially quite academic to look at, and as Richard said, some people do really it does really resonate with individuals, but instinctively outside of social care, certainly other kind of organizations where you've got people that are really interested in driving their careers, driving or going up in the ranks, and whether again within financial services or whether in retail, a lot of people are really quite hungry for that kind of framework. They can kind of work through and have lots and lots of development and conversation in those areas, and we don't really see that happening in health and social care. It is more organic, and it's more fluid, and so I think it's useful as a framework. And Richard's experience, some people kind of shy away from it, some people kind of love it, and some people are just kind of it's not that accessible. But I think there are those key qualities around caring, compassionate, that kind of absolutely run through a lot of those kind of areas. I suppose what's interesting for me as well, really, if you look in those kind of 7, there's 3 that are about self-awareness, integrity, and personal development, and a lot of the stuff that's coming up in the chat kind of relates maybe to those areas. And then you've got the external kind of other 4 around working with a team, encouraging others, developing networks. It's kind of almost that what's within and what's outside with the team that I work with, and beyond the realms of the service. So I think that's a good one to look at. And the other part really of this, from the question really about what other management and leadership skills, I suppose if we start to maybe look at some of those technical skills as opposed to those associated with behaviours and qualities, and whether that's around brilliant interviewing skills and identifying talent, which again, some of that is really instinctive. Around the great conversations, and that's probably one thing that runs through for me through everything. It's about the quality of the conversation and having great conversations, or finance, I suppose, is the other ones, whereby you haven't got and maybe customer or resident kind of experience. I think that's inherent within most, but there are, and I probably put myself in this boat, don't necessarily have to really work hard, I suppose, around the customer focus, and some of that stuff doesn't naturally, a natural people person doesn't always come to you instinctively. So you can still be a great leader without having maybe some of the higher levels of empathy that others might have.
That's absolutely, Matt. I think that's really interesting, and I think what you were saying or alluding to around looking at the skills gaps, and how you address the skills gaps that maybe, as you say, around the kind of business things that relate to kind of the business side of things, and how then do you embed that across? Because a lot of it is kind of values, culture driven, and soft skills driven, and like you say, and then it's how we address some of those skills gaps that we're kind of seeing. That's really helpful. Thank you, Matt. Tay, have you got anything to add from your experiences?
So I quite like Maslow's hierarchy of needs as a framework in general, just as a person. And again, it goes back to we are a people business, and realizing that we are nothing without our workforce. So I've done lots of leadership courses. I've done I've done an MBA. I've done a level 5. I've done Prince 2, you know, I know all the frameworks, and in theory they are fantastic, but in practice actually it's very difficult to implement them, especially if you're working in our sector. You've got so many different types of people from different backgrounds, especially if you're doing values-based recruitment, for example. So you're not going to have a group of people who have all come up through the same kind of like academic routes, through the same training programs. It's not like we're working, you know, for any of the big four like PwC. Everyone is different, and it's about, you know, there's lots of comments around how you bring out the best in people, but also realizing what do people need to enable them to have that self-actualization. What is it in terms of individuals' needs that we as an organization can look then to empower? I've said before about time, but it's also around resilience and acknowledging the challenges that we have, which is, you know, Phil, when we were talking about this before, and I was really keen to say that it is very difficult in this sector, and it is important to acknowledge that and to actually look at the resources that we have. We don't have unlimited time, we don't have unlimited funding, we don't have unlimited workforce to be able to, you know, backfill when people go off and do training. So what can you do with what you have to be the most effective and efficient? Both to support the people who you deliver care and support services to, but also looking at the wider sector and looking at, okay, so this is my experience. How do I engage with other people who have other experiences? And then what do we see that long-term vision collectively to be, and how do we, as different people, and acknowledging that we all have our differences, and there's been comments around bias training and EDI training, and acknowledging that differences is what makes us who we are. Let's look at, rather than trying to essentially, you know, marginalize people and make people all perform in exactly the same way, how do we embrace those differences, and how do we see the best in everyone?
I think that's
I just comment,
right. There's a question. There's just the model that you mentioned at the beginning. I don't know if you want to mention it again. Oh, there you go. Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
There's a comment that was in the chat, and it was around register manager. I've been trying to type and listen, sorry, at the same time. If I just go back on a comment to say, you've got a lot of register managers who aren't supported sort of higher up, and I'll just say, I think there's 2 points to that. And the first is actually looking at, well, what is the support that individuals need, and looking at different sources. And that could be e-learning training, for example, that could be through your local support networks, that could be, there's lots of webinars, but there's also you know, I'm a big fan of the cliff notes, the dummy guides to a lot of the policies and things. I don't tend to read the whole document. I will say that the sector is quite fragmenting. It's quite challenging sometimes to be able to source that support that is available, which is why it goes back to why it's important to have the networks and your buddies. And it's acknowledging as well that second point around owners and directors and nominated individuals. So I'm all of those things. There isn't a lot of actual support that is available, and I'd say as a director, as an owner, sometimes it's difficult to know actually what your first legal responsibility is to your service, but then also knowing, well, where's that limit, and how do you provide support without micromanaging? And then it goes back to that conversation of, you need time, you need to be able to have those one-to-one conversations and ensure that you do have that open culture to be able to encourage people to say what the challenges are.
Yeah, I think it's really valuable, really valuable. Something that you kind of resonated with me when you were talking just a little at the beginning of that was how you learn from each other, and how you learn from, because we're all personalities and we all learn in different ways and we all take information in different ways. But when you're looking at your kind of the relational side of things and your communication style of things, and you know, ultimately it's how we turn up as the best version of ourselves every day, because we're responsible for inspiring and leading and encouraging others to be the best that they can be. And I think it's how you learn from others, isn't it? It's taking the best practice from those around us that we know you know, will enable us to support people and lead people better. There's no kind of toolkit or specific book, although there's millions of tools out there. Sometimes it comes down to kind of instinctiveness and intuition and understanding how to get the best out of people and that relational approach, isn't it? I think that's the point certainly I'm taking from today. It's not a yes or a no or a black or a white. It's using that whole holistic mix of skills and personalities and behaviours to drive an organisation and the workforce forward, which is critical.
And one of the skills that, I briefly mentioned, resilience. Now, social care both supports and employs more people than health. We are constantly being asked to fall into to health, to articulate ourselves in terms of health outcomes, in terms of, using a language that actually doesn't resonate in our part of the world. And it's, as a leader in social care, you need to have resilience to be able to say why, how, I don't understand, to ensure that our voice is heard, and to ensure as well that the language does then change. So, I've been to many meetings with health and it's just acronyms. I've got absolutely no clue what's going on. And I'm that person in the chat going, what does that mean? It's not, fantastic. You have to be resilient to be able to do that. But then, the other day, I was, what was it that I said to you? It's that balance between, well, how do you keep asking and then saying, well, no, this is who we are, this is who I am, and this is what I'm representing, and being proud of that, without what I was called the other day, which is very angry about it. And it's, that balance, and that's part of that leadership and management sort of training, so that you understand who you are, what you're trying to say, and how you're then going to say it.
Absolutely, really valid, Tay. That's right. We could go on forever on this one. It's just such a big and wide kind of subject area. So thank you. We'll move on to the next session. Thank you for everyone on that. So if we can just move to the next slide. I think you're absolutely right on resilience, and it seems everyone's certainly agreeing with that. I think we're all largely familiar with this around, what are some of the metrics around retention and leadership, and how what are the factors that avoid us kind of losing good talent and good managers and good leaders. We know that learning and development is key to developing our workforces and retaining our workforces. It's that, and it's not just the capability, the competence, it's that investment, it's that recognition, it's enabling people, empowering people. Organisation values, I think we've covered in quite some depth about how important they are and how that makes a workforce feel part of something, feel supported, and be on the same path in terms of a direction of travel. And I think certainly something that quite often a lot of organizations don't do as well as they could is celebrating achievement and recognizing good practice, recognizing when someone's done something really good. That simple gesture of a pat on the back still, in my personal view, can go a long way. And it's how we do that in the time or limited time that we've got. And I think Tay and the rest of the team have certainly kind of picked up on that empowerment. So the more you involve in colleagues into the decisions that have been made, the more you bring them into the organizational kind of flow and cycle and operating rhythm, the more people feel inclusive, the more they feel part of the organization and the direction of travel the organization is going on. So I think these are fairly kind of obvious points. So quite conscious of time, we'll go into the next slide, which I think is our last speaking session. So we'll try and aim to do that within the next kind of, 5-6 minutes, something like that. And then we can open up to the floor for any particular questions that anyone's got. And then I did say 45 minutes and we've gone over, so I do apologise. I don't want to stop when we've got some good, healthy conversation if everyone's okay, but we'll go until the scheduled time at 11. So the question we have here is, how do we see the future of leadership in adult social care? What's ahead of us? I think we know what the challenges are, but what do we see the future being? What are some of the things that we need to be really focused on above and beyond what we've already spoken about? Again, I'll open that up to the panel if anyone wants to jump in first with thoughts on this.
I think for me on this one, it's probably not about holding up a crystal ball necessarily. It's the conversations we've previously had and looking at the leadership, the qualities, the behaviours, the attitudes, the positivity that we bring to work every day, and the choices that we make to lead. Every day we choose how we're going to turn up to work. So regardless of changes in technology, regardless in however, adult social care reforms might take shape in the future, I think fundamentally we will always be about people and about relationships, and providing really high quality services to improve kind of our residents' or clients' kind of lives and livelihood. And I don't think the skills are really going to be very different to what we've discussed already. We just need to somehow find that resilience, find that space, find that thinking time to be able to do and achieve what we've spoken about before. So yeah, that's probably my take on this.
So I guess yeah, no, which makes perfect sense, Matt. So I guess it is finding time, isn't it? It is, the important things that we've talked about often is, led by what capacity we have to support people and mentor people. So I think it's finding time. I took from that, which I think is hard, but it's vital to the future. Thanks,
yeah,
Matt.
And I suppose partly, finding time, it doesn't happen. We don't just find time. You make a conscious decision every day. Everything that we do is a choice, and it's about the choices that we make to do something. Even that simple, do you acknowledge someone's behaviour? Do you walk on by and just think, oh, I've seen, it's great? There's just the minutes at a time can make a huge difference.
Agreed. Absolutely. Richard or Tay, your thoughts?
Well, I suppose I have a kind of a semi-unique position, having spoken to so many kind of leaders over the past 6 years. What I'd like to reflect back is that, and I think as Matt said, there's the structures and things are there. It's about culture, it's about values, it's about working together, networking. It's about having a strong, compelling vision that everybody's bought into, and it's about appreciating what we do really well and focusing on strengths just as much as the challenges that we have. And if I can just offer, and this is no science about this, but it's just from my experience, I think probably about 10% of the leaders that I see on the courses that I deliver truly understand what those things are. And there's a sort of a vague understanding and appreciation of culture. If I talk to groups of people about the values of your organization, some people will, about 10% of people I think actually know what they are. And then there's a sort of a vague, well, I think one of them might be respect. And it's the things are there, and I think we need to work harder at really getting the juice out of all of them, because there's, the culture being right. If we get the values right, we live and breathe those values, and we live the enrichment of those values. The culture will come. Working together is going to be crucial. Collaboration, networking. Tay spoke about, networking together. I spoke to a friend of mine a few years ago. He's very high up in one of the world airlines, and I said to him, "What's the secret of your success?" And without hesitation, he said, "Networking, collaboration, working together. I'm not a brilliant man," he said, "but I know how to collaborate. I know how to network with others." So, and I really feel it's important from the conversations that I have that we learn to appreciate what we do well, the strengths that we have, because I think we have a lot of strengths, and we spend too much time, and understandably, trying to fix the problems. But I think we have so many great things that happen in social care that we must also appreciate that. And Matt said it earlier with the in the moment thing. I think it's a brilliant tool in the moment, but it's got to appreciate all the things we do well, not just the things that are the challenges that we face.
Absolutely agree. I think you're getting some support on that, Richard. Absolutely, in the chat as well. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really, really valuable. Absolutely, and certainly the networking as well. Tay, any thoughts from yourself?
Yes, apologies, because I've got different hats and I do management and leadership and different organisations. So I know my responses are a bit confusing, but I'd say you need to, as an organisation, really kind of do that piece of work to look at what your vision, mission, values are, and have that capacity to be able to see, well, what is the shared and collective objective that you are trying to achieve. I'd say for leadership in social care, that actually providers, we all need to come together. We need to look to invest in the sector and realise that, all right, if I've got somebody who's in my care home, let's say I've got a registered manager and my care home isn't right for them, that's all right as long as they stay in the sector. So someone can go between me and Matt, for example, because a year later someone's going to go from Richard to me. 2 years later, someone's then going to go from Matt to Richard, and we want people just to keep going round and round and staying, but in the sector. I'd say as well around care in general that often the rest of the world, the rest of the sector, or the other industries, they see us as like a growth sector, but that can then mean that it's a bit of a tick box when they say, "Oh, look, we've invested in growth, invested in care." I'd encourage everyone to be curious, to actually find out what does that mean? What is that investment for? How can we then use that training opportunity, for example? So you can get boot camps, for example, that just don't support our workforce to be able to get them into particular roles, because actually the vacancies we have, for example, are registered mental health nurses, for example. A boot camp is never going to help that person, but is there something that you as a leader can do to look to see, well, can we use that funding in a different way? Who do we go to? Who do we find out that information from? I'd say it is challenging times, but it also means that it's the opportunity to be creative, to be innovative, to look at other sources of funding, and to find workarounds. And part of that workaround, again, very practically could be, all right, I can't afford to have 10 people from my workforce going off into training, but could I see with the care homes in my local area and home care, I've got a couple of agencies that I know, connect with them, and maybe we all send 2 people each to go off and do that training. It's the same theory around residents being able to go and access day opportunities and transport, and where funding and everything else is all limited. How are we smarter? And it has to come from us, because we, residents have to, and clients have to be at the heart of everything we do. Our workforce have to be at the heart of everything we do. And going back to, it's a people business. What do we do to support our people, and how can we be creative? And I'd sort of encourage everyone to be curious about the world that they live in, and not just necessarily accept being done to, which is unfortunately again what happens in our sector, and go, well, actually no, that doesn't work for me. This is what I think would work better to support our people.
Absolutely, absolutely, beautifully articulated, Tay. So much in there, and I absolutely agree. And I think everyone's kind of really resonating with what you've said as well within the chat. So thank you very much. We're drawing close to the end of the session, so I don't want to kind of skim the time too much in terms of any particular questions. I think certainly I can see there's been some really healthy conversation in the chat, and I think there's some really valid points. I think keeping service users at the heart was one of those, the ones that really stood out, and I think certainly we've seen quite a lot around kind of innovation and integrity and being instinctive. I think something in there around robust recruitment as well, which is really helpful. I guess with a couple of minutes before we close all together, does anyone have any particular questions they want to pop into the chat that any of us can answer specifically? If you've got anything, please pop it in and we'll try and answer. If there's nothing specific, but it may spring to mind in the following days, weeks, whatever, then feel free to contact any one of us, and we can certainly answer any questions. I'll just hold for a few seconds just to see if anything comes through on the chat.
I think one thing I'd like to say in response to Tay actually is around, we certainly are a sector that's not flush with resources, but we are a sector that have got hundreds if not thousands and thousands of brilliant people that do think differently and do think creatively, and because of we're not, say, flush with resources, it forces us to be more creative, have more ingenuity about the way we do things. And some of the ideas that Tay just shared around collaborative working and networking, they're forced upon us because of the the lack of funding, the lack of resources. And it's not forget that I guess we are a sector that has just brilliant people that are really passionate about what they do.
Absolutely. I can see a question that's coming from Colette. Is there any help to change job role? That's a hard one to understand. In what context? So I guess, is this if someone's kind of progressing or have changed scope in the role? I don't know if anyone can clarify on that one. No, I'm not sure if anyone's got any points on that one. We may have to come back to you on that one, Colette.
On job roles, so we promote the web of opportunity, which is both every job, it's both a role and a setting. And if you're not happy in your role or setting, that you can use training, qualifications, work experience and placements as well. Your local colleges will be able to support and kind of know what those different opportunities are, depending on where you are in the country, and the local associations, how they've connected all the providers together as essentially employers. The problem that we have is you can't just go onto NHS jobs and, you know, search for those opportunities. So it is a bit fragmented. But again, it goes back to the networks. How do you know what you want to go into? So it's very difficult to know the unknown, isn't it? So speaking to other people to find out both what role you are interested in doing, and then, you know, I always say look at a job advert and then work backwards in terms of skills, qualifications and experience that you then need, and then again long-term thinking, this is what I need to do in the midterm to ensure that I achieve my long-term goals, and then acknowledging that we do have different settings. So, you know, supporting younger adults in a learning disability setting is going to be very different to palliative end-of-life care that's being delivered in a nursing home, for example.
Absolutely. That's great, Tay. Wonderful. Listen, conscious of time, there was a couple of slides that did have a list of associations and bodies and partner groups that you can reach out to, which are on the slides, but for some reason, oh, there we go. We will be sharing this. I'm conscious we've gone over, so we'll be sharing this on email with all of you anyway. So there are some links here to organisations if you're not already involved or you want to be part of, or as you say, networking opportunities as well. So I think that's pretty much everything for today. So I just want to thank our panel members, Tay, Richard and Matt, for joining us this morning. I know how busy you are, so really, really grateful you've taken the time out to be part of today. Really, really helpful discussion. I think I'm seeing the feedback's been pretty good. So thank you so much. And obviously everyone that's been able to join us this morning, thank you so much. Delighted you've been part of something today. We're always keen to get feedback. We're always keen to hear what you might want to hear about next. So any thoughts, any ideas, any needs you might have around any of the subject areas, we'd be more than happy to facilitate something. So thank you, everybody. I hope today's been useful, and we'll hope to see you again at some point in the future. Have a brilliant day, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Bye-bye.